Hello, everyone. Welcome to owasppatna's first session. Today, we have Shashank Dubey, who is a cloud security enthusiast. Shashank works as a cloud security engineer at Payatu. Hi, Shashank. How are you?
Hey, hi, all good.
Okay. We are very excited to have you today. So the floor is all yours. Just one more thing. If any of you have questions, keep your questions ready because Shashank will be answering all your questions towards the end of the session.
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks very much for the opportunity provided from OS Partner. And I would like to welcome you all on this very first session of OS Partner. So let me quickly share my screen. And yeah, I hope screen is visible to you. Is it visible to you?
Yes, Shashank, it's visible. Perfectly visible.
Okay, let me do a few settings over here for the proper view. Yeah, all right. Okay. All right, so today's session is all about securing your AWS cloud infrastructure. So that will be an overview of the AWS cloud security. Now, I would expect that all of the audience joined over here, they might have different domains, but what I see in the system is like you have an understanding that you have joined this session. So I assume that you have worked prior. So it would be a great session going ahead if you have the prior experience of AWS. Now, uh, before that, like Alia mentioned a bit about myself, but I would like to have a bit about myself again. So as you all know that I'm known by a name called Shashank, and I currently work as a cloud security engineer at Payatu. Now in Payatu or as a cloud security engineer, I do cloud security automations. I build up secure cloud architectures and also building the alerts and monitoring systems to tackle against the security attacks in clouds. Now, along with that, I also dabbles in securing the Docker and Kubernetes environment and other container orchestration tools like OpenShift and all. Along with that, most important, I am a part-time social worker at Subble NGO. So if you have time, you can go and check out our work at Subble NGO on LinkedIn or any of the social media platforms. Yeah. Now let's quickly jump to today's agenda. So we will start with the overview of AWS security, and moving forward, we will check that AWS IAM security best practices, and after that, we will check around the network and data security in AWS Cloud Infrastructure, and we'll end up this session with monitoring, logging, compliance, and governance. So yeah, and then after we will have the question session, so where you can have your question related to the AWS cloud infrastructure security. So yeah, all right. Okay, so before the overview of AWS security, let's have a bit interesting facts about AWS, why we should have to be more concerned about the AWS security. So as you all know that AWS is the leading cloud service provider with a market share of more than 32% as of now, and along with that, there are more than 200 plus different services in AWS that is required. A lot of there is a lot of uses of all the services. So again, data will be generated against the services. So it is required to keep secure all those services. So for that, we should have to be more concerned about the AWS security. Now, you might have seen a lot of big giants, big organizations, big IT tech firms. They are completely moving on the cloud infrastructure and cloud architecture. All those platform as a service, software as a service, all those industries, they have completely moved into the cloud infrastructure. So it is also a major concern for security professional and enthusiasts to learn about the AWS security. Now, before learning the AWS security, we need to have the certain experiences with, or you can think of it as a prerequisite. So there could be services and infrastructure that you should have to be aware of. Along with that, authentication and authorization. So how you are connecting to your AWS cloud infrastructure, and what level of permission you have, what access you have, what sort of changes or modification you can do in the cloud infrastructure. So all those things comes under the authorization. So that we need have the information about that. Before that, uh, we need to be more concerned about the compliances. Along with that, monitoring, detection, and response. So yeah, we will see all those belongings in the next slides. Okay. So first and first, we need to check about the identity and access management, which is a service as a global service in AWS, where we have the concept of users, groups, policies, and roles. So basically, these four attributes you can think of as like this all are the ones which is required to connect to the AWS environment, and then whatever the things you can perform, that is completely sole responsibility of these four services. Now over here, first and foremost thing is the users. So users are like all those people who want to access the AWS infrastructure. Now for accessing the AWS infrastructure, we have multiple ways to do that. Now there comes the security concern, like how you are accessing your AWS environment. Now what happens generally is like we generally need to interact with cloud services via management console, which is kind of GUI, or we can think of as a web-based portal. Now, there comes the security concern whether you have enabled your multi-factor authentication or not, because once your credential got compromised, anyone can have access to your AWS infrastructure. Similarly, we have an different mode of accessing the AWS infrastructure is the uh, you can think of it as an set of access keys and secret key pairs. Now what happens over there is like, let's suppose you have created any application and that application needs to connect to your AWS environment. So let's suppose that your EC2 server needs to connect with the let's suppose the S3. Now in that particular case, it cannot do it with the management console credentials. So for that, we need to generate some certain key pair, or you can think of it as a token based service. Now again, the security concern comes over here as well. How well you are accessing your resources in AWS. So whether you are just you mistakenly exposed your credentials in some of the Git files or any of the CI/CD pipelines. So that is a major concern. So we should have to be more concerned about how well we are accessing the AWS cloud infrastructure. So we certain recommendation over here is like you should rotate your keys on a certain amount of interval, and you should not have the escalated privilege for those credentials or the user or service accounts. Now there comes the groups. So what happens generally is like groups are such as the collection of users, and you can directly attach the permission to that particular group, and whosoever is the part of that group, I mean the users, so they will directly have access to all those services or the policies or the permission that were directly attached to the groups. Now here comes the major security concern. So let's suppose that generally if we are not following the security architecture from the IAM point of view, so it generally happens like let's suppose you have created a high privileged group and you have added mistakenly a low privileged user, or let's suppose a user got access somehow to your security credentials, and he has the permission to change his or her group. So in that case, he can elevate his privileges. So that will be a major security concern with terms of the permissions. Now, next we have the AWS policies. So these policies are majorly responsible for whatever the access you require inside the AWS infrastructure. So these policies we need to be more security concerned about, because you have seen that in the AWS we have three different kind of policies. The very first one is AWS managed, which we cannot change, and then we have the customer managed policies, which we can generally change. Again, we have the inline policies. Now, AWS policies we can have a track over it, but when it comes to inline policies, so there we don't have any track. Although we have track over the customer managed services, but yeah, for inline services we don't have any track. So we should avoid using inline policies until and unless it is not required, very much required. So we should always find an alternative of either attaching a policy directly via the managed policy or via the direct user attachment or group attachments. Because what happens in inline policies is like you cannot track where these policies are being used. So it's hard for the security auditors, once after any attack has been recorded and you have identified some some of the footprints that okay, this attack has been performed using this particular user. So it's really difficult for an security auditor to figure out how these policies are managed. So again, you have to be more concerned about how you are attaching the policies to the users groups and roles. Again, there are certain other like parameters in the identity access management, that is roles. And roles are very much important because it gives you because the roles area of exposure is you can think of it as an attack surface. So the attack surface for the IAM roles is way more larger than the user groups and policies, because AWS IAM roles gives you the facility to like directly communicate with your AWS infrastructure from let's see outside the AWS infrastructure or from the different AWS infrastructure, or you can think of it as a like from any sort of applications using a sort of a piece of code. So using the software development kit. So a lot of possibilities through which you can interact with the AWS infrastructure. Now for that we use generally IAM roles. So for IAM roles, we need to be more concerned about how we are using the IAM roles. So whether we have enabled any trusted policies over there, because IAM roles work as a, you can think of it as a two-way communication. So it's like that you have created an IAM role, and if you have not added any trusted policy to it, so it will not like work in accessing the AWS infrastructure. So you can think of it as a firewall rule. So a firewall inbound rule, what it does is like it allows that okay, this particular network should be accessed from this particular source. So similarly in IAM roles, you have the trusted policies. Just a minute, let me go on mute. I'll continue in few minutes. Okay, so in the IAM roles, we have the trusted policies. So in the trusted policies, we add the kind of inbound rules you can think of, just for the understanding that if you created a trusted policy and you have added that, okay, only EC2 can access my role. So this will allow only EC2 to access your role. Now, let me move to the next slide. So this slide is all about the network security in AWS. Now in network security, AWS offers a range of networking security features to protect customer data. Now this security features can be enabled using different AWS services, or you can think of it as a sub services. So now in network security, you have seen that we have the VPC, we have network access control list, we have firewalls, security groups, VPNs, transit gateway, route table, subnets, and internet gateway. So they all have different roles in just maintaining the AWS security. Now we have the VPC. In VPC, we have certain attributes like network access control. So it's same as the security group. So in security group, we add the inbound and outbound rules, and we attach it with any of the AWS resources, let's say EC2 or RDS instances, or let's say Lambdas. So that will give the functionality that okay, if we have restricted some access in inbound rules, so how will we are going to access that particular resources. It is defined in the security groups. Now similarly, we have the NSEL groups. Now the NSEL network access control list, those inbound rules are directly connected with the VPC, so you don't have to worry about whether you have attached the proper security group with the services or not. If you have attached the proper NSEL at the VPC, so those rules will be directly imposed on that particular VPC network. Similarly, we have a different ways of accessing and connecting to your uh, AWS network securely. So for that, we have transit gateways, VPNs, and again we have the concept of subnet in the AWS. Now you have created a VPC, and then in a subnet you have a route table, and in that route table you have added a rule that okay, if requests are coming from XYZ network, then route it to this particular network. So you should have a track over all the route table data, that okay, uh, whatever the route data that you have added, that should implicitly work. So it should not be like that then an attacker can modify the route table, and it can able to like route the traffic to the malicious network. So these are major security concerns when you are dealing in the network security in AWS. So you should have to keep the tracking and monitoring of all the network virtual devices, or you can see that network attributes. So you have to keep an eagle eye on that. Similarly, let's suppose that you have a subnet where you have added all your private resources, and certainly someone added let's say internet gateway to that particular subnet. So it means that you can route the traffic from that particular subnet to internet. So some malicious activities can be performed using that. So it is on the high level architecture I am talking about. It's not like if you just attach the internet gateway on subnet, it will directly implicate or open doors for the attackers. It's not directly like that. But yes, again, if you are using it and if you don't require it and if you are using it, so it will be a problematic situation for you. So because there can be a different scenarios for different attack and attempts. So based on a few of them, it is recommended not to directly use internet gateways to those subnets which don't require the internet connectivity. So those are generally the private subnets. Okay, I have certain chats over here. I'm not sure. Okay, all right. So I thought I might be disconnected. So people will be answering in the chat box. All right, not an issue. Now we have the concept of data security again in the cloud, because whenever we are dealing with the cloud, so ultimately we are just storing all of our data over there. Now AWS offers encryption at rest and transit for customer data stored on AWS and providing an additional layer of security to that particular data. Now, data in transit can be uh, can be encrypted using certificate manager. So generally, people knows about that. Okay, if you want to encrypt your data, or if you want to securely connect with different services inside AWS or from outside AWS to the AWS service, so you should use the certificate manager, because ultimately that is going to encrypt the data in transit. But that is not the only option in AWS. We can have the VPC endpoints. So those are also the secure way of transiting your data. Along with that, we have the concept of direct connect and VPNs. So using that, you can securely connect to your AWS infrastructure. Now, again, we have the concept of data at rest. So again, that can be achieved using the key management services provided by AWS. So we can have the customer managed keys as well and AWS managed keys as well. So using that, we can secure our data at rest. So data security is also a major concern in AWS. So for that, we have these options provided by the AWS by default. So based on your uses, based on your requirements, based on your infrastructure, so you can directly deploy all the services and you can keep your data safe in post transit and at rest. The next thing over here is, once you have secured your network, secured your data, secured your access and authorization, you should have to be you should have to monitor and collect the logs and detection of all those malicious and attacking attempts on your infrastructure, whether it could be related to network data or authentication and authorization. So you should have an eagle eye on everything. So for that, we have different options in AWS by default. Like you have seen the AWS CloudWatch and CloudTrail. Now, what is the major difference over here is AWS CloudWatch, you can collect the custom metrics, you can monitor all of your uses in AWS. So let's suppose that you have a web server in EC2, and what happens with that? Let's suppose some attacking attempts is going on that particular server. So let's suppose DDoS or any other attacks are going on that particular server. So what generally happens is like you will see a certain high spikes in CPU utilization and memory consumption. So those CPU utilization and memory consumption indicates that something which is abnormal going on that particular server. So this all you can monitor using the AWS CloudWatch. So along with that, you can implement the custom metrics and you can check you can monitor the logs as well, the access logs, the error logs related to that particular web server. Again, we have the Amazon CloudTrail. So now we discussed about the authorization mechanism in AWS. Now, if you have to keep a track over it, so basically whatever the things which are going inside AWS or which are happening happening inside AWS, those all are based on AWS API calls. So if you are clicking on any particular thing from the web, so it hits the AWS API call. So whenever it hits the AWS API, it is being logged by the Amazon CloudTrail. So Amazon CloudTrail logs each and every AWS API calls. So let's suppose that if you want to monitor that who is accessing what inside your AWS environment, so you can use the Amazon CloudTrail. So that particular tool will give you a visibility over that. Now again, you can integrate the Amazon CloudTrail with CloudWatch metrics to visualize that particular data. So yeah, these two tools by default you can use in AWS. Now we have the tools like Grafana, Kibana, Prometheus, and Elasticsearch. So these are the open source tools. You can use it as well. Also, Grafana and Kibana, these all are provided as a software as a service in AWS as well, but those are not compatible with all reason and services. So yeah, so if you want to use it, so you will have to build an instance and you will have to manually install and route the logs to that particular instance in order to visualize it. So again, monitoring and logging is important. And also one step ahead of it is like you once you will detect it, you can generate alerts against those. So generally nowadays major organization use Teams, Microsoft Teams, Slack, email is one of them. So you can route the alerts over there. So you can directly create a Teams channel, and once something is going non-compliant, so you can directly give or send alerts to that particular channel. So let's suppose SOC team or any of the security monitoring team. So this will ease your task, and it will makes it more flexible to keep an eagle eye on all of the things happening inside your AWS infrastructure. Uh, After that, we have the compliance and governance. So after all, if you have done all the security strengthening inside your AWS infrastructure, and if you are working in a particular domain of the society, let's say you're working in a health sector, or let's say you are working as a payment industry, so you will have to be compliant with the norms and standards of that particular industry. So that is why we have the compliance and governance concept in AWS as well. Now, AWS compliance controls have been assessed as meeting the highest industry standards over the past years. So for that, you can use the HIPAA compliance. So HIPAA compliance is basically for your health compliance. So if you are working in a health sector, and let's say if you are working in a particular region, so let's say it's US, so there you have to maintain the uh, patient data in a secure manner. So like your ID and password, you term it as a confidential information. Similarly, there are certain norms with the health compliance that you cannot disclose someone's health information, uh, and that should be treated as confidential information. So without the consent of the patient or the user or the customer, you cannot disclose someone's health data. So just let me frame one scenario for the better understanding of this concept. So just think of it as like you are a healthcare industry, and you are just having your servers and all the databases over the AWS infrastructure. Now in that, you have implemented the server, and whatever the data you have collected, you're directly pushing it to the S3 bucket, which is a data storage utility in AWS. Now you have, let's suppose, 10 employees, out of which there are a few employees who keeps an eye on the data that has been stored in your AWS infrastructure. Now, if your employees are able to access that particular data of the patients, so you are not the HIPAA compliant, because what HIPAA compliance says that whenever you are just maintaining or accessing, maintaining any of the patient data or health records, so you should keep it very much confidential, and one cannot access it directly. So for that, what you can do is like you can create another AWS account, and you can push all the S3, I mean all the health records in S3 bucket in different account, and you should have no access to that particular account to any of your employees. So it's just a small infrastructure example for that particular compliance. Now again, we have the payment industry where we have to be compliant with the payment card industry compliance, that is PCI DSS. So it generally says that how well you have to manage your whenever you are working in a payment card industry. So how you have to manage the customer card details and all of these stuffs. So that let's suppose if there is a data breach against the company, so even though data got leaked, so hacker will not have the juicy information out of that encrypted data. So for those, we have certain compliances. We see ISO and CIS. So in ISO, generally ISO and CIS, these are a little bit different in terms of AWS. So ISO certification by default it is for AWS. All of these compliance are by default for the AWS, but again AWS has the shared infrastructure, shared responsibility model. So out of which you have to be more concerned about like for which particular resources and compliances you are responsible, and for what sort of compliances AWS is responsible. For that we have the AWS shared responsibility model. So whatever the things for that AWS is responsible that are already compliant. Now, if something is left against that, so you should have to be more worried about it. There are certain custom things. So let's suppose that you have launched a Linux instance. Let's suppose Ubuntu instance or Amazon Linux 2. So that particular Amazon Linux 2 is already compliant with CIS benchmarks. Okay. Now, once you will start developing any changes over there, so for that you have to be more concerned about how you can customize the changes over there or the modification you have made. That should have to be CIS benchmark compliant. So these all things are related to the compliance and governance. You can explore more and more about it after exploring all the major things like data and network and all infrastructure security. Now, here, I think I forgot to add the bonus slide. So after this, let me explain it to you. So that bonus slide contains the AWS security tooling. So in that security tooling, you can use a lot of AWS services like AWS GuardDuty, which is again threat detection, it detects the threat based on the machine learning algorithms. So you can use that particular utility to identify some ransomware attacks or some file encryption or anything related that is termed as a threat inside your AWS infrastructure. So you can use the AWS GuardDuty. Again, we have AWS Inspector, AWS Security Hub, we have the config rules, so AWS config. So again, these tools you can use. And if you want to check the cloud configuration, and if you want to review the cloud configuration of AWS, so again there we have the third part here. You can say that the open source tools. So you can use like a Scout Soup Crawler, Paku. So these all tools you can use to check your cloud config reviews. So few of these tools only check the cloud configuration, and few of them also includes the compliance and governance utilities as well and checks as well. Yeah. So here I would like to end up this session, and you can connect with me on my LinkedIn. And yeah, now you are open to shoot your questions. So one by one, I'll take it and will try to answer all of those. Over to you, team. Yeah.
Yeah, so if everyone wants to ask any question, they can directly open their mic as well, or they can put it in chat. Uh, for talk, it was very nice, Shashank, to be connect with you. Like this talk was very awesome. If someone is starting or like he's just getting started in cloud security or just wants to understand like how things work, I think and it was the like one of the best talks I have seen. So yeah, that did clear the like basic questions. And if you guys have any question, just ask it to Shashank and he'll clear it to you.
You can unmute yourself and ask the question if you want.
Hi Shashank, Kumar this side. Shashank, can you more elaborate about like AWS EKS clusters, like how compliance work there?
Yeah, so EKS generally deals with the Kubernetes services in AWS. So basically, what happens in EKS is like all those compliance rules that I have just talked about. So when it comes to AWS shared responsibility model, so when uh, AWS is responsible for any of the services. So let's suppose the infrastructure that you are provided with, whether it is compliant or not. So AWS will take care of it, and AWS claims itself once it introduce any of the AWS services, a new service. So it claims that it should be more compliant with all the belongings of that particular segment of society or industry. So if Kubernetes services they are providing, so they claim it directly that okay, yeah, this is compliant. If you want to check the compliance, so you can create your own custom rules, and you can create those custom rules in AWS config, and then again you can check whether it is compliant or not. So for that you can follow the AWS blogs or AWS documentation. So out of all like whatever the experience with all the cloud service provider, I found AWS documentation pretty well and pretty documented. So you will not have any trouble while checking all those stuffs. And nowadays we have Chat GPT, so you can use that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect. But like most of our client ask for like they need to be audit like EKS. They want basically like what are the can we, is it possible to do configuration review or audit for the EKS itself, not just for the whole AWS?
Yeah, we can do it. So generally, if you use the commercial tools, so they won't provide you the facility to, as a feature to select a particular service and scan for a particular checklist. But we have certain tools. I'm not sure whether Scout does it or not, but yeah, you can explore it a little bit. Now again here, in addition to it, so one thing I just want to clarify, whether you want to know about the AWS EKS or whatever the infrastructure that you have built inside the EKS. So which one you are talking about for checking the compliance?
Obviously the infrastructure of we use clusters for the different application. The client has uh, working over the Kubernetes, and the main concern for the client is to test for the infrastructure, whether we are using the EKS clusters, are they secured or not, because it's a
Okay,
big need
so
for the PCI DSS.
yeah, so for that we have the benchmark checks tool, that is Kubebench. So you can use that particular utility to figure it out. Otherwise, you can again you have to check the compliance rules or benchmarks for the Kubernetes itself. So there is
And one
no
more
way
thing,
connection with the AWS.
like apart from this, like uh, is only CIS benchmarking is sufficient for the configuration reviews for AWS?
No, no, no. I mentioned like the data security, network security. After that, I mentioned the compliance and governance rules. So it basically checks for the how well you manage the data or manage the infrastructure. So whether you have implemented the firewall or not. So let's suppose that you are using the web servers in your AWS infrastructure, right? Now you can restrict the incoming network traffic from the security group itself, right? So why there is a need of using AWS firewall, right? Because we have the inbuilt firewall in the Linux itself. We can restrict the inbound and outbound data. So why there is a need of AWS firewall? But again, if you go with the compliance, so if you're not using a firewall, you are red flagged, right?
So as per
So
your experience, what automated tool you prefer more for the AWS configuration review?
I generally prefer cloud conformity for AWS cloud config review.
Sorry,
Cloud conformity from Trends Micro.
cloud conformity. Okay.
Yeah. Generally, for one or two services, we can have the automation script, custom automation script. Using CLI also, you can figure out a lot of things. If you club all those CLI commands in a script, you can find config reviews for one or two services, if there are not many. Yeah.
So this particular tool gives us support to deploy on the DevSec environment.
It's a commercial tool, so you will have to get a license out of it, and it will, I mean, it will check for all the compliance corners and along with all the config reviews as well. So both will
No,
be added in there.
I was asking like this tool, we can use this tool to be deployed in the DevSec environment. Like we can integrate the CI/CD pipeline.
No, I guess no. It's for just for the one-time check. So once you click a button, it will check for all the checklists and it will give you a report. So once the non-compliance, the red flags, if you will turn it off, I mean the non-compliance, if you will make it compliant, so it will again check it in the real time and it will show you that, okay, yeah, this is now compliant. So it will also share you like broad list of like how you can configure those things. So all support will be added over there. I mean, the steps to uh, mitigate it.
Even NASA's has also launched their cloud infrastructure audit. Like, what you recommend? Like,
Yeah,
what are the
that
pitfalls
I haven't
that
used.
yeah? Oh,
Tenable product I haven't used yet, but I particularly like the cloud conformity. If you don't want to use the cloud conformity tool, so you can also use their knowledge base. So in their knowledge base, they have included all the security checks. So you can make your utility out of it. And when it comes to open source, so Scout Suite I prefer, Crawler and Paco also.
perfect, perfect. Thank you.
Any other
Any
question?
other?
Do you answer? Okay. It seems like we don't have any other questions, Shashank.
Okay, all right. So I hope you enjoyed this session. I would like to keep it as kind of a little bit hands-on in this session, but I was running out of time because of consecutive events. So that's
Yes.
why I keep it as just few slides and will and try to elaborate all the major the points over here. So in the upcoming sessions, we might see the practical demonstration of any of the attack simulations, or maybe any of the config or tools, utilities, reviews, and all those stuff. The users, yeah.
Sure. So what we can do is in our any next sessions, we can have a practical session where you could demonstrate like how we can actually use those things, right? In real world
Yeah,
scenario.
yeah.
So yeah, that one thing we can do. And just a reminder to all of you guys, like we'll have sessions once in a month, most probably. So our next session will be second week of May, any day, no, not any day, most probably Friday to Sunday, any day between Friday to Sunday. So yeah, with that, we will conclude this session. And thank you so much, Shashank, to share. You shared awesome stuff here, and we all learned a lot of things. So yeah, thanks again. Um,
Thanks for the opportunity
thank you
provided.
all for joining. Yeah, like whoever joined, thanks a lot. And yeah, we'll see you guys in next session.
All right,
Have a great
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.